The Philippine economy in the 1960s was a period of steady growth and optimism. Back then, we were one of the most advanced economies in Asia, with strong industries, growing cities, and a focus on self-sufficiency through local production, while the government pushed for industrialization and development. Now, as we look at our economy today, we see how much has changed and how much we've had to adapt. From a largely agricultural nation in the 1960s to a more service and remittance-driven economy today, the journey of the Philippines tells a story of resilience, reform, and ongoing development. Over the past 60 years, the Philippines' economy expanded from around $6 billion in 1965 to nearly $500 billion today. But few understand the roller coaster behind those numbers. Which presidents engineered booms, which policies backfired, and how did one administration's choices ripple into the next? Over the next minutes, you'll see every single year's GDP in USD and real growth percentage, discover each leader's signature achievements and missteps, and learn how each term set the stage, good or bad, for the one that followed. We begin our analysis in 1965 because it's the earliest year for which official annual real GDP growth figures are consistently available. Let's dive in. Ferdinand E. Marcos Sr., 1965 to 1985. From 1965, when GDP was $6.52 billion, to 1985, when it reached $23.50 billion, growth under Marcos Sr. averaged 3.8%. His early years tapped sugar and coconut exports and rode the 1973 and 1976 commodity booms to plus 8.78% growth. Grand infrastructure projects, North Luzon Expressway, San Juanico Bridge, and plans for a Metro Manila subway transformed mobility and urban life. He also founded the Philippine Heart Center and Lung Center, pioneering specialty care. Yet funding these dreams meant heavy external borrowing. The 1969 balance of payments crisis forced IMF stabilization, and by the early 80s, debt service demands outstripped revenues. Martial law centralized power and stifled dissent, undermining institutions. Growth collapsed to 7.04% in 1984 and 6.86% in 1985, leaving a legacy of unpaid loans and weakened governance that would constrain his successors' budgets and reform space. Corazon Cory Aquino, 1986 to 1992. Inheriting a shattered economy and $28 billion of unpaid debt, Cory Aquino saw GDP climb from $25.6 billion in 1986 to $40.5 billion by 1992, averaging 3.67% GDP growth in her term. Her administration restored democratic checks and balances, passed the local government code to devolve spending power, and negotiated tough IMF adjustment programs that steadied the peso. She also introduced the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Medical Assistance, a precursor to broader health coverage. However, her decision to stall agrarian reform, delaying land redistribution to coffee and rice farmers, frustrated rural voters and slowed agricultural productivity. Political instability, including coup attempts in '86 and '87, also diverted resources from investment. The economy dipped 0.44% in 1991. Still, her democratic reforms rebuilt investor confidence enough for Ramos to launch deeper market opening policies. Fidel F. Ramos served as president of the Philippines from 1992 to 1998. He inherited a fragile but freer economy, from $43.8 billion in 1993 to $61.8 billion in 1998, he averaged 3.7% growth. His Philippines 2000 program deregulated telecommunications, privatized Philippine airlines and power utilities, and struck peace deals with Muslim and communist insurgents, opening Mindanao to investment. He also modernized the Ramos Medical Center and expanded primary health programs. Yet aggressive power sector privatization outpaced capacity expansion. Rolling blackouts in the mid-1990s hampered factories and homes. When the 1997 Asian financial crisis hit, GDP dipped by 0.51% in 1998. Ramos's debt burden and nascent financial markets left little cushion. His successors faced the twin tasks of restoring energy reliability and shoring up the banking sector before rebuilding growth. Joseph E. Estrada, 1999 to 2001. Estrada took over as the currency crisis lingered. Between 1999 and 2001, GDP grew modestly from $66.1 billion to $68.5 billion, averaging 2.7%. His populist Erap para sa Mahirap agenda expanded agrarian welfare and free medicines, and he signed the Cheaper Medicines Act to reduce drug prices. These social advances temporarily boosted poor households' well-being. But his protectionist tariffs on imported rice and sugar in 2000 provoked price spikes and trade disputes, squeezing consumers and exporters. Political scandals and his impeachment proceedings in 2000 eroded market confidence. By the time Arroyo took office, her team had to reverse protectionism, reassure foreign investors, and rebuild fiscal buffers, efforts that defined her early years. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, 2001 to 2010. Arroyo inherited a distorted tariff regime and weak revenues. She passed the EV8 law in 2005, doubling annual VAT receipts, and expanded PhilHealth funding, raising coverage to over 60% of the population. Infrastructure spending on airports, roads, and power plants fueled GDP growth from $73.2 billion in 2002 to $115 billion in 2010, averaging 4.5% and only dipping to plus 1.45% during the 2008 global recession. However, her reliance on short-term foreign borrowing to fund these projects raised debt service costs. By 2010, external debt had risen sharply, constraining Aquino III's room for fresh infrastructure spending without triggering new vulnerabilities. Arroyo's fiscal consolidation and new revenue streams did stabilize the economy, but also forced her successor to balance growth ambitions against fiscal prudence. Benigno Aquino III, 2010 to 2016. Aquino III built on strong revenues and stable debt levels. Between 2011 and 2016, GDP surged from $125 to $204 billion, averaging 6.1% growth. His sin tax reform generated $70 billion annually for universal health care, and his conditional cash transfer program lifted 2 million families out of poverty. He fast-tracked public-private partnerships to address highways and rail shortages. Yet cautious $3.7 trillion in PPP commitments were underutilized initially. Delays in procurement and land acquisition meant many projects broke ground only late in his term. This infrastructure gap prompted Duterte to double down on build, 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 inheriting the projects Aquino III properly planned but didn't fully deliver. Nonetheless, Aquino III's fiscal discipline and anti-corruption stance laid the foundation for record investments. Rodrigo Duterte, 2016-2022. Duterte inherited Aquino III's PPP pipeline and robust revenues. From $223 billion in 2017 to $404 billion in 2022, GDP soared at 6.6% pre-COVID, fell 9.52% in 2020, then rebounded to plus 7.58% in 2022, averaging 1.8% over his term. Build, build, build finally delivered key expressways, airports, and the first phase of the Mindanao Railway. He also signed the Universal Health Care Act in 2019. However, his decision to impose lockdowns without a clear fiscal cushion drained revenues, requiring emergency borrowing that increased the deficit. The drug war's human rights controversies also choked tourism and FDI. Marcos Jr. inherits both the new transport network and the debt of pandemic relief, needing to sustain growth without reigniting fiscal pressures. Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., 2022 to 2025. We will include Bongbong Marcos in the discussion of his progress, but we will not include him in the ranking because his term is not yet finished. Marcos Jr. stepped into a post-pandemic recovery with GDP at $437.15 billion, projected to reach $497.50 billion by 2025 at an average 6% growth. He's launched the Maharlika Investment Fund to finance new ventures, expanded digital infrastructure, and passed the mental health and accessibility laws. These build on Duterte's road network and Aquino III's PPP framework. Yet his decision to fast-track large-scale borrowing for megaprojects risks raising debt service costs to levels reminiscent of Marcos Sr.'s era, potentially crowding out social spending. How he balances infrastructure ambitions with fiscal sustainability and learns from the debt legacies of the past will determine whether this growth chapter ends in stability or overreach. Now let's rank all the presidents. This ranking is based solely on each president's average real GDP growth performance. and several terms were marked by major financial crises that skewed results. From lowest to highest, Rodrigo Duterte averaged 1.8% GDP growth, impacted mainly by the COVID-19 pandemic. Joseph Estrada followed with 2.7% during a time of political instability and post-crisis recovery. Fidel Ramos posted 3.7%, driven by economic reforms but slowed by the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and Corazon Aquino both had 3.8%. Marcos for early infrastructure but later debt issues, and Aquino for democratic transition and rebuilding. Gloria Arroyo averaged 4.5%, steering the economy through tax reforms and global challenges. Leading is Benigno Aquino III with 6.1%, reflecting strong investor confidence, reforms, and consistent growth. Note, Bongbong Marcos is not included as his term is still ongoing. Thanks for watching Did You Know? If you learned something new, hit that like button, subscribe for more Filipino stories, and share this video with someone who loves history, politics, or fun facts.